What if I told you Carl Jung discovered a mental shift so powerful it could make you completely unshakable? Not confidence, not charisma, something far stranger. In his private notes, Jung described people who became psychologically invisible. They could walk through hostile rooms untouched, stay calm in chaos, avoid drama without even trying. It wasn't luck. It wasn't fear. It was a transformation so radical. Jung believed it made them immune to the hidden social predators controlling everyday life. And today, you'll learn exactly how they did it, and why Jung believed anyone could. The case that started everything. The case that revealed Jung's most unsettling discovery began with a patient he described in his private journals. A librarian who came to him in 1921 not because she was suffering, but because her complete invisibility in social situations was making her question her own existence. This librarian, let's call her Elena, worked at the Zurich University Library, but something extraordinary had happened to her. She could walk through the most toxic workplace dynamics without anyone trying to involve her. Gossips ignored her. Office bullies looked right through her. Manipulators couldn't seem to see her as a target. Her sister brought her to Jung because she was convinced something supernatural was happening. "Doctor," she said, "my sister has become a ghost. Yesterday she walked through a heated argument between 3 colleagues, and none of them even paused their fighting. It's as if she doesn't exist in their minds." But here's what Jung discovered that changed everything. Elena wasn't actually invisible. She wasn't hiding or suppressing her presence. She had simply learned to project what Jung called psychological neutrality. She emitted no emotional signals that triggered other people's predatory or competitive instincts. Jung called this the predator blindness effect. Most people unconsciously broadcast their fears, insecurities, and desires through their body language, energy, and micro-expressions. Social predators, manipulators, bullies, energy vampires scan for these signals like sharks sensing blood in water. But Elena had learned to emit psychological silence. The discovery of social radar Jung realized that Elena had mastered something most humans never understand: the invisible social radar that operates in every human interaction. Every person you meet is unconsciously scanning you for vulnerability, opportunity, or threat. They're reading your confidence level, your emotional state, your social status, and your potential usefulness to them. Elena had discovered this radar after a devastating experience 2 years earlier. She had been systematically bullied by a colleague who seemed to target her specifically. But instead of fighting back or avoiding the situation, Elena became fascinated by the psychology behind it. She asked herself one crucial question: what am I broadcasting that makes me a target? The answer shocked her. Her people-pleasing energy was like a beacon to manipulators. Her need for approval was visible in her posture. Her fear of conflict radiated from her micro-expressions. She was unconsciously advertising herself as the perfect victim. Jung documented Elena's transformation in what he called the Invisibility Protocol. Instead of trying to appear confident or strong, she learned to appear psychologically neutral. She projected no needs, no fears, no desires that others could exploit. The 3 layers of psychological invisibility. Jung discovered that psychological invisibility operated on 3 distinct levels, which he called the transparency layers. The first layer was emotional invisibility. Elena had learned to neutralize her emotional broadcasts. When anxious, she didn't project anxiety. When excited, she didn't project enthusiasm. She maintained what Jung called emotional baseline, a state where her internal emotions didn't leak into her external presentation. The second layer was social invisibility. She had mastered the art of being present without being noticeable. She participated in conversations without drawing attention to herself. She attended meetings without becoming a focal point. She existed in social spaces without activating other people's social radar. The third layer was psychological invisibility. This was the deepest level. Elena had learned to project no psychological needs that others could read or exploit. No need for validation, no fear of rejection, no desire for status. She became what Jung called a psychological blank slate. Let me show you how this works. Marcus, an accountant, was constantly being assigned extra work by colleagues who sensed his inability to say no. Using Jung's method, Marcus learned to neutralize his people-pleasing signals. He practiced maintaining neutral body language, speaking in even tones, and projecting no emotional availability for others' problems. Within weeks, Marcus reported something remarkable. "It's like I became invisible to the office vultures," he told Jung. "They stopped approaching me with their drama and extra work. It wasn't that I became unfriendly. I just stopped broadcasting that I was available for exploitation." The psychological camouflage technique. Jung's research revealed that Elena had developed what he called psychological camouflage. Like a chameleon changing colors to blend with its environment, she had learned to match the psychological atmosphere of any situation without standing out. Elena described this ability to Jung. "Doctor, I realize that most people make themselves visible by contrasting with their environment. If everyone is stressed, they try to be calm and stand out. If everyone is excited, they try to be reserved and appear different. But I learned to match the emotional temperature of the room while maintaining my inner neutrality." This discovery contradicted everything psychology understood about social dynamics. We assumed that to survive socially, you needed to assert yourself, make an impression, or establish dominance. But Jung's patience proved that sometimes the most powerful position was complete invisibility. The technique Jung developed was elegant in its simplicity. He called it the chameleon protocol. When entering any social situation, instead of trying to make an impact, you observe the dominant emotional frequency and match it externally while maintaining internal detachment. Jung documented case after case of patients mastering this technique. Patricia, a nurse, learned to become invisible to difficult patients who typically targeted healthcare workers. Instead of projecting either sympathy or authority, she projected neutral competence. Patients treated her professionally because they couldn't read any emotional vulnerabilities to exploit. The mirror of indifference. But Jung discovered something even more unsettling about psychological invisibility. Elena had developed what he called the mirror of indifference. She reflected back to people exactly what they projected, giving them nothing new to react to. Elena explained this to Jung. "Doctor, I learned that people can only see you if you give them something to see. Their words, their emotions, their attempts to engage me, I reflect them back without adding anything of my own. They end up interacting with their own reflection." This concept revolutionized Jung's understanding of social dynamics. Most people, he realized, were constantly adding their own energy, opinions, and emotions to every interaction. But those with psychological invisibility had learned to become perfect mirrors, showing others only themselves. Jung identified 3 types of psychological mirrors his invisible patients had mastered. The first was the neutrality mirror. They reflected back the exact energy level of the person they were interacting with, neither increasing nor decreasing the intensity. The second was the agreement mirror. They reflected back understanding without necessarily agreeing or disagreeing, giving people nothing to push against. The third was the presence mirror. They were fully present in interactions while maintaining complete emotional detachment, like a clear lake reflecting the sky. The predator confusion effect. Jung's research into psychological invisibility revealed another disturbing pattern. Elena and others like her had learned to confuse the predatory instincts that operate in social situations. Social predators, manipulators, bullies, energy vampires rely on reading emotional signals to identify targets. When they encountered someone who was psychologically invisible, their targeting systems malfunctioned. Elena demonstrated this principle during one of Jung's sessions. A new colleague had attempted to manipulate her into taking on extra work by using guilt and pressure tactics. Instead of resisting or complying, Elena had responded with complete psychological neutrality. "Doctor," Elena said, "this person's manipulation technique told me everything about their psychology and nothing about mine. Their guilt tactics revealed their own shame. Their pressure showed their own desperation. Their attempts to create urgency exposed their own anxiety." Jung realized Elena had developed what he called predator radar, the ability to see through manipulation tactics to the psychological weakness driving them. When someone tries to manipulate you, they're always revealing their own vulnerabilities, not exploiting yours. This discovery was disturbing because it meant most social manipulation was based on psychological projection. Manipulators weren't reading your weaknesses. They were projecting their own methods onto you. The attention economics principle. Jung documented the pattern repeatedly. People who tried to guilt you were trapped by their own guilt. People who used fear tactics were controlled by their own fears. People who manipulated through anger were slaves to their own rage. But here's what Jung found most troubling. Once Elena could see these patterns clearly, it became almost impossible for anyone to manipulate her. She started feeling curiosity about the psychological pain driving others' manipulation rather than fear of their tactics. Elena described this shift. "Doctor, when someone tries to manipulate me now, I see a desperate person using the only tools they know. How can I be threatened by someone who's obviously more afraid than I am?" Jung realized this was the ultimate psychological invisibility. When you can see others' manipulation attempts as expressions of their weakness rather than demonstrations of their power, you become completely immune to their tactics. The invisibility paradox. The invisibility technique involves 3 diagnostic questions. When someone tries to manipulate you, ask, what psychological need is driving this behavior? What fear or insecurity is this tactic meant to hide? How can I respond with neutrality that doesn't feed their pattern? Let me demonstrate this with a real example. James, a software developer, was constantly being guilt-tripped by his manager into working overtime. Using psychological invisibility, he asked, what need drives this guilt tactic? Fear of missing deadlines. What insecurity does this hide? Lack of proper project management skills. How can I respond with neutrality? James learned to respond to guilt tactics with neutral questions. What specific outcomes do you need? And what resources would help achieve those goals? This response gave his manager nothing emotional to manipulate while addressing the underlying business need. But Jung warned about a dangerous side effect of mastering psychological invisibility. Once you could move through social situations without being targeted, maintaining genuine connections became challenging. You might feel like you were surrounded by predators and prey, rather than authentic people. The cost of transparency. Elena experienced this isolation. Doctor, sometimes I feel like I'm watching a nature documentary rather than participating in human society. I can see everyone's manipulation tactics so clearly that I struggle to take any of their behavior personally. Jung realized this was the price of psychological invisibility, clarity about human social dynamics that could lead to detachment from human connection. The key was learning to be invisible to predators while remaining visible to authentic people. Jung's final discovery about psychological invisibility was perhaps the most unsettling of all. Elena hadn't just learned to avoid being targeted. She had developed what he called social alchemy, the ability to transform every manipulation attempt into psychological insight. Elena explained this process. Doctor, I no longer see manipulative people as threats to avoid. I see them as unconscious teachers showing me exactly how psychological desperation operates. The more someone tries to manipulate me, the more I learn about human psychology. This represented a complete reversal of normal social survival instincts. Instead of avoiding manipulators, Elena actively observed them as case studies in psychological dysfunction. Instead of seeing toxic people as enemies, she saw them as unconscious research subjects. The observer position. Jung realized this was the ultimate stage of psychological invisibility, transforming every social predator into a teacher about human psychology. Elena had learned to use others' manipulation attempts as data for understanding human nature. The process Elena described was methodical. When someone attempted manipulation, instead of reacting or defending, she would immediately ask, "What does this tactic reveal about their psychology? What fear is driving this behavior? What can this teach me about how desperation operates?" But here's what Jung found most disturbing. This level of psychological development created individuals who were nearly impossible to manipulate, control, or exploit socially. They had transformed every potential social vulnerability into a source of insight. You already know this truth intuitively. Social manipulation cannot touch you because you understand its mechanisms. Toxic people cannot drain you because you don't engage with their emotional hooks. You have the capacity to become socially invulnerable, not through aggression, but through the invisibility that comes from complete psychological neutrality. The 3 stages of social alchemy. This social alchemy involved 3 transformation processes. First, manipulation mining, actively extracting psychological insights from every person who attempted to exploit your perceived vulnerabilities. Second, pattern recognition, using others' behavior to identify and understand the universal principles of social manipulation. Third, immunity synthesis, converting every discovered manipulation tactic into permanent immunity against that approach. Let me show you this process in action. Rachel, a human resources manager, was constantly being manipulated by employees using various sob stories to get special treatment. Instead of just resisting these attempts, she used social alchemy. She asked, "What is this manipulation teaching me?" That people often use emotional tactics when logical requests fail. What pattern does this reveal? That desperation makes people abandon authentic communication. What immunity can I develop? The ability to separate genuine needs from manipulation tactics. Rachel transformed her vulnerability into expertise. She became skilled at identifying legitimate employee concerns while remaining immune to emotional manipulation, making her one of the most effective HR managers in the company, the compassionate invisible. But Jung warned about the dark side of social alchemy. People who mastered psychological invisibility sometimes became so focused on studying human behavior that they lost empathy for those still struggling with basic social survival. Elena eventually experienced this. "Doctor, sometimes I feel like I'm conducting a sociology experiment rather than living a human life." Every interaction becomes a chance to study social dynamics rather than connect with another person. Jung realized the final challenge of psychological invisibility was maintaining humanity while achieving social immunity. The goal wasn't to become completely detached, but to remain compassionately invisible, using your social immunity to help others rather than to isolate yourself from them. The ultimate integration. Elena's transformation into what Jung called a compassionate invisible happened gradually. Initially, her invisibility created distance between her and others. People found her neutrality unsettling, even mysterious. But Jung helped her understand that true psychological invisibility included the ability to make others feel safe and understood when appropriate. "Doctor," Elena reflected, "I realized my invisibility was incomplete if it only protected me. True social freedom means being able to choose when to be visible and when to disappear, based on what serves the highest good of the situation." Jung documented how Elena learned to use her psychological invisibility in service of others. When colleagues needed genuine support, she could become visible with authentic presence. When toxic dynamics emerged, she could fade into neutrality without absorbing the dysfunction. This is the paradox Jung discovered about ultimate psychological invisibility. It requires maintaining your humanity while developing immunity to predatory social dynamics. The truly invisible person can engage authentically with authentic people while remaining completely transparent to manipulators and energy vampires. The final secret, Jung's final notes on Elena, revealed the ultimate secret of psychological invisibility. She has learned to be simultaneously completely present and completely detached. This is perhaps the highest achievement of social psychology: complete availability to authentic connection combined with complete immunity to social predation. The librarian who became invisible became Jung's greatest case study in social psychological potential. Elena proved that psychological invisibility isn't about becoming antisocial or withdrawn. It's about becoming so psychologically neutral that you can move through any social environment with complete freedom. The advanced invisibility protocols. Jung's continued research with Elena led to the development of what he called the advanced invisibility protocols, specific techniques that could accelerate the development of psychological invisibility in others. These protocols were based on Elena's most sophisticated abilities and represented the pinnacle of Jung's research into human social potential. The first protocol was environmental reading. Elena had learned to instantly assess the psychological climate of any situation and adjust her visibility accordingly. In toxic environments, she became completely transparent. In healthy environments, she allowed appropriate visibility. In healing environments, she became a stabilizing presence. Dr. Elena explained, "I learned that psychological invisibility isn't one fixed state. It's a dynamic response to environmental needs. I'm like psychological weather, adapting to whatever conditions serve the highest good." The second protocol was energy matching without absorption. Elena could perfectly match the energy level of any situation while maintaining complete internal neutrality. If she entered a high-energy crisis, she could provide appropriate response without absorbing the chaos. If she encountered deep grief, she could offer presence without taking on the sadness. The third protocol was selective engagement. Elena had mastered the ability to engage with people's highest potential while remaining completely invisible to their psychological dysfunction. She could have meaningful conversations with narcissists by speaking only to their buried authentic self while ignoring their manipulative ego completely. The invisibility paradox resolution. But Jung discovered that Elena had solved what he called the invisibility paradox: how to remain psychologically invisible while still being genuinely helpful to others. Most people who achieved invisibility became detached and unhelpful. Elena had learned to be invisible to predation while visible to authentic need. Doctor, Elena shared, I realized that true invisibility requires perfect discernment. I need to be invisible to what would harm or exploit me, while remaining visible to what genuinely needs my help. This requires constant psychological sophistication. Elena had developed what Jung called philanthropic invisibility, using her immunity to social dysfunction as a platform for serving others' genuine growth. She could enter toxic family systems and help without getting pulled into the drama. She could work with addicted individuals without becoming codependent. She could support depressed friends without absorbing their hopelessness. The collective unconscious interface. Jung's most remarkable discovery was that Elena had learned to interface directly with what he called the collective unconscious, the shared psychological patterns that operate beneath individual awareness. Her psychological invisibility gave her access to group psychology dynamics that most people couldn't perceive. Doctor, Elena reported, I can sense when groups are moving toward conflict, healing, or transformation before the individuals involved are conscious of it. It's like I can read the collective psychological weather patterns. This collective unconscious interface allowed Elena to position herself in ways that supported positive group evolution while remaining invisible to group pathology. She could sense when organizations were ready for change and subtly catalyze transformation processes. She could detect when communities were moving toward healing and offer invisible support for those processes. The psychological aikido mastery. Elena had also achieved what Jung called complete psychological aikido mastery, the ability to redirect any form of psychological aggression in ways that serve the highest good of all involved. This wasn't just defensive, it was transformational. When someone projected anger at Elena, she could redirect that energy toward addressing the underlying injustice they were actually upset about. When someone tried to manipulate her with guilt, she could redirect their manipulative energy toward honest communication about their real needs. When someone attempted to control her with fear tactics, she could redirect their controlling energy toward collaborative problem-solving. "Doctor," Elena explained, "I learned that all psychological aggression is misdirected life force. Instead of blocking it or absorbing it, I can help people aim it at targets that actually serve them." This psychological aikido mastery made Elena incredibly valuable in conflict resolution situations. She could enter the most hostile environments and help people transform their destructive patterns into constructive ones, often without anyone realizing she was facilitating the transformation. The invisible leadership principle. Jung documented Elena's development of what he called invisible leadership, the ability to guide groups and individuals toward positive outcomes while remaining psychologically invisible as the source of guidance. This was perhaps the most sophisticated form of influence Jung had ever observed. Elena could enter dysfunctional organizations and, through strategic positioning and energy management, catalyze positive changes that appeared to arise spontaneously from within the organization itself. She could support individual transformation processes in ways that left people feeling like they had discovered insights entirely on their own. "Doctor," Elena reflected, "I discovered that the most powerful form of leadership is invisible leadership. When you guide people in ways they can't detect, they own their transformation completely. They develop genuine confidence because they believe the growth came from within themselves." This invisible leadership required what Jung called egoless influence, the ability to create positive change while taking no credit for it. Elena had transcended the need for recognition or acknowledgement, allowing her to influence situations in ways that preserved everyone's sense of agency and autonomy. The reality distortion field. Jung's research revealed that Elena had developed what he privately called a reality distortion field, the ability to subtly alter the psychological atmosphere around her in ways that made positive outcomes more likely. This wasn't manipulation. It was environmental optimization for human flourishing. People in Elena's presence found themselves thinking more clearly, feeling more hopeful, and accessing more creative solutions to their problems. Conflicts naturally de-escalated around her. Creative insights emerged more frequently. Healing processes accelerated. "Doctor," Elena tried to explain this phenomenon, "I think I've learned to optimize the psychological environment the way a gardener optimizes soil conditions. I don't control what grows, but I create conditions where the best possible growth can occur." Jung realized that Elena had achieved something unprecedented in human psychology, the ability to upgrade reality for everyone around her while remaining completely invisible as the source of the upgrade. Jung's unsettling discovery about people who became psychologically invisible revealed the ultimate truth about social dynamics. We are not victims of other people's manipulation tactics. With the right understanding and practice, anyone can develop the psychological invisibility that makes social predators unable to target them. Moreover, this invisibility can become a platform for invisibly serving others' growth and healing. The path Elena traveled, from emotional invisibility through social camouflage to psychological neutrality, compassionate invisibility, advanced protocols, collective unconscious interface, psychological aikido mastery, invisible leadership, and finally, reality optimization, represents the complete journey of social psychological development that Jung believed every human could achieve. Today you've learned the psychological techniques that Jung documented in his most private case studies. The neutrality projection that makes you invisible to predators. The chameleon protocol that helps you blend into any social environment. the mirror of indifference that reflects others' energy without adding your own, the predator confusion that neutralizes manipulation attempts, the social alchemy that turns every toxic encounter into psychological insight, and finally, the compassionate invisible that maintains humanity while achieving social immunity. Jung's most unsettling discovery wasn't that some people could become psychologically invisible. It was that this ability reveals the vast social potential lying dormant in every human being. The question isn't whether you can develop psychological invisibility. The question is whether you're ready to claim the social freedom that Jung proved belongs to you. Remember Elena's final insight. Doctor, I learned that true invisibility isn't about what people can't see in you. It's about choosing what you allow them to see. Your journey to psychological invisibility starts now. Every manipulation attempt you encounter is a teacher. Every toxic person is a mirror showing you social dynamics. Every social challenge is an opportunity for developing immunity. The only person who can make you socially visible against your will is the person you haven't learned to become invisible to yet. Take Jung's unsettling discovery and make it your liberating truth. You have the power to become psychologically invisible to anyone who would exploit you, while remaining visible to those who would genuinely connect with you. Thanks for watching. See you in the next dimension.